The Al-Kebula Revivalist Movement presents Africa Speaks with Al-Kebula on Galaxy Radio 102.5 FM and GalaxyAfiwi.com, the only de-brainwashing station. Weekly discussions and live debate on all issues affecting the African community at home and abroad. Tune in Mondays 8 to 10 p.m. and have your say as we talk it straight and make it plain. It's live, it's hot, it's scintillating, it's real. It's Africa Speaks with Al-Kebula on Galaxy Radio, the only de-brainwashing station. 10-Dime Warrior Kings and Queens, you are tuned into Africa Speaks with Al-Kebula on Galaxy Radio, the only de-brainwashing station. As usual, Africa Speaks is known for keeping its finger on the pulse of the African community, addressing the most pertinent and controversial issues, which some radio stations just won't touch. So keep it locked in, locked on for the next 2 hours as we talk it straight and make it plain. This show is not for the faint-hearted. 10-Dime Warrior. Yes, indeed, Kings and Queens. The date is Monday, the 30th of May, and we are here with a special pre-recorded Africa Speaks with Al-Kebula because we are currently in Birmingham supporting Africa Liberation Day observances as hosted by our sister organization, the PACM, the Pan-African Congress Movement. As we are every year, Kings and Queens, in the Al-Kebula Revivalist Movement, we consider it a cultural imperative, and we say that we don't dictate to our culture dictates to us. So we want to send a homage and respect out to the Pan-African Congress Movement for keeping the observance of ALD going from since 1975 until today, Kings and Queens. You know, that kinds of consistency can only benefit our people, and we pay homage to any organization of Africans who is prepared to have stayed the course and maintain such an institution for as long as they have. So we are here at the moment, but we didn't want to leave our Galaxy Radio family uncatered for as regards to Africa Speaks with Al-Kebula. So we are here with a special pre-recorded show where we'll be addressing the question, how can we make Pan-Africanism more practical? Once again, Kings and Queens, how can we make Pan-Africanism more practical? This is the fifth in our series of Africa Liberation Day specials, Kings and Queens, and we are proud to be joined by our special guest, Baba Buntu, also known as Amani Olubanjo Buntu, founder and executive director of Ebukhosini Solutions, a community development capacity building organization based in Azania, South Africa, specializing in cultural events, education, training, production, management, and social entrepreneurship. Yes, and indeed, Kings and Queens, our special guest will be joining us all the way from Azania, South Africa, one of the institutions of Africa Liberation Days that we, as much as possible, connect up with the global African world, Africans at home and abroad, so that we can unify our efforts towards total liberation. So stay tuned for that special treat in today's show. For those who may not be aware, my name is Tafadzwa ShakaRa Mbandaka, also known as just ShakaRa, and I'm going to be your host for our special pre-recorded show, Kings and Queens. Big respect and love goes to my second mother, Mama Kai, who is my normal co-host, and she is also with us in Birmingham for Africa Liberation Day. Before we enter our main topic for this evening and address the main subject, we want to pay homage to one of our great ancestors, a man by the name of Kwame Ture. The reason being, Kings and Queens, because this is the fifth in our series of Africa Liberation Day specials, and Baba Kwame Ture was one of those who was instrumental in the proliferation and cementing of Africa Liberation Day in the Pan-African calendar. He was a stalwart of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the organization who hosted Africa Liberation Day in London on the 21st of May this year. And many of the activists in my parents' generation tell the story of the fact that his visit to the country in 1983 was a defining moment in the development of Pan-African organizations in this country, kings and queens. So we do want to take a moment to pay homage to our great Baba Kwame Ture, a man who joined the civil rights movement as a teenager and became known as the father of Black Power in the 1960s, and went on to become one of the preeminent Pan-Africanists in the world, kings and queens, working under the government of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré in Guinea. He was at one point the husband of our renowned great mama, freedom fighter and cultural activist, Mama Miriam Makeba. And you know, for the rest of all of his life, kings and queens, until he passed away in 1998, remained a revolutionary of the highest order. So we're going to take a few moments out to pay homage to Baba Kwame Ture, and we shall be back on the other side. Tenda Amwari, kings and queens, African power for all African people.
Just a little planning. Just a little planning. This is what we want to speak to you about this evening. Making the unconscious conscious. Now we must say from the very beginning, the only, underline the word only, the only route to consciousness is through struggle. Now, for example, we've shown you the unconscious struggle. Those who rose up in righteous rebellion against the state police in Los Angeles, they were consciously involved in struggle. They were involved in struggle, unconscious but involved in struggle. The conscious must understand precisely what their task is, and we've said this 2 years ago here, we repeat it. Ours is not to teach the people to be conscious, but to make them conscious of their unconscious behavior. Our task is not to teach the conscious to teach the unconscious to be conscious, but to make them conscious of their unconscious behavior. Because unconsciously, instinctively, they seek freedom. What we must do is make them conscious. Look, you want freedom anyway, let's be serious. Let's sit down, let's plan it, let's wage protracted war, and let's tear down the system and walk on to liberation. It's as simple as that. This aspect of the unconscious becoming conscious is linked to mobilization and organization, something we mentioned last year. We must make clear distinctions between mobilizers and organizers. To be an organizer, you must be a mobilizer, but being a mobilizer doesn't make you an organizer. Much confusion is to be found here. Malcolm X was a great mobilizer. He was a great organizer. Martin Luther King was a great mobilizer. He was not a great organizer. These facts can be easily seen from King and Malcolm. When Malcolm went to a place, he left a mosque. When King went to demonstrations, he broke down desegregation and he moved on. As a matter of fact, King was not concerned with organization to the point that even though he was the most popular Baptist preacher in America, without the shadow of a doubt, and probably, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the most loved, he could not become president of the National Baptist Convention. Yeah, so many of them. The National Baptist Convention. As a matter of fact, if my memory serves me correctly now, and I remember it was Muhammad Speaks that carried the article on the front page in 1964, when King tried to become president of the National Baptist Convention. There was so much confusion there that a minister was actually pushed off the stage and died in the struggle. Yeah. And of course, King lost. The man who won was a reactionary man by the name of Jackson. He never did nothing for the people, never cared about the people, just was a pork chop minister who used their money to put gas in his big Cadillac. But he was organized. But he was organized. We say that we must come to know the difference between mobilization and organization, because the enemy will use mobilization to demobilize us. Mobilization is very easy. Very, very easy. Because since we're people who are instinctively ready to respond against acts of injustice, anytime there's one little act of injustice, we can blow it up and we'll find people who come and make some mass demonstration around it. Miss Sally lost her job. Let's rally. She will get her job back. People will come and rally. So-and-so got kicked out of school because the teacher's unjust. The people will come and rally. They will come to rally at issues. And this is what mobilization does. It mobilizes people around issues. Those of us who are revolutionary are not concerned with issues. We're concerned with the system. The difference must be properly understood. The difference must be properly understood. Mobilization usually leads for reform action, not to revolutionary action. If we would look scientifically at the October 16th million and more march, we would see clearly that this was a mobilized event, not an organized event. We must know clearly the difference between mobilization and organization. One of the characteristics of mobilization is that it is temporary. Organization is permanent and eternal. Clear differences must be made because the unconscious can usually be captured easily around one-issue items, around mobilization items, but it's hard to catch them around organization. But these unconscious must be brought to organization. We must transform mobilization to organization. We say the enemy will come and use mobilization to demobilize us. Many brothers and sisters who've been to the million and more march will say to you, I was there. Well, what are you doing today, my sister? I was there. There weren't too many sisters out there, but you know, with a million brothers together, you know where I had to be. I was there. Yes. And then, of course, you find brothers, yeah, I was there. I helped you. What are you doing today, brother? If we're not careful, we allow mobilization to become events. The struggle is never an event. It's a process, a continual, eternal process. We say it is our job to use mobilization to drive us to organization. You know our theme is organization. We want power. We don't want money. We don't want fame. We don't want fortune. We don't want popularity. We want power. Power. And power comes only from the organized masses. Power comes only from the organized masses. Therefore, since this is what we're concerned with, power, and we as a Pan-Africanist, we have every right to be concerned with it. Africa, after all, is the richest continent on the face of the earth. Properly organized, should be the most powerful continent on the face of the earth. Therefore, our drive towards power is clear. We want power, and we can only have power through the organized masses. Of course, capitalism, a system which in deforming our thinking always seeks to make it appear as if the organized masses is some unattainable goal. Even the other day, when speaking to a sister who's been involved in activities over a period of years, she said, Kwame Ture, so when you say a mass party, what do you mean? I said, I mean a mass party. She said, but the APRP goes everywhere in England, they go in the Caribbean, in the United States, in Africa, and they're always saying about a mass party. What do you mean? I said, every African in the world inside our party. She said, are you going to get that? I said, that's what I'm working for. And if I don't get it, my granddaughter going to get it. But I'm working for it. Her disbelief comes from the fact that capitalism tells us that, well, you can be scientific about everything except human nature. That people are so different, they have such different tastes, such different ta-la-la-la, that you can't bring them together under the same roof. This is a lie. We will never tire of saying it. Capitalism does not lie some of the time. It lies all of the time. When it tells the truth, it's a result of a double lie. It's a logical fact. It's a logical fact. So capitalism has this belief that you can't organize all the people around the same thing. That's not true. You can organize all the people around one thing, truth. Now, what capital...
Yo, this is Swiss So Solid. Africa Speaks without cable land. Galaxy 102.5. Blaze the fire, 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 fire.
So I present to you my own manifesto for president. A revolving plan for revolution. A radical attempt to include every segment of our community. From the radical to the sellout. Student and the graduate. Professionals and the criminals. Drug dealers and religious. Activists and the churchgoers. Even those coconuts understand they can all serve a purpose. But I'm not proposing another organization. As much as I love them, right now we don't need more of them. We need to build a program for us now to focus on the objective, increasing education ability, securing our community, creating better economic activity. But we first need to sit down with some old fallen soldiers of the movement, find out what they're doing and how they can be included. For once too many a dedicated soldier living way below their talent, or they're doing big things and not part of anything. Come on. We'll give those coconuts and sellouts an ultimatum. You can either opt out or opt in. We're not even asking you to partake in frontline action. Can even support us privately, denounce us publicly, give us that exposure, then from then, we'll take it further. If not, sayonara, my brother. Which means, when you get into Kobe Bryant, O.J. Simpson, Michael Jackson type situation, as much as I love you, sayonara, my brother. Now, onto the plan of action. We need to sit down with Black Saturday School projects, increase their funding by linking the performance and the promoting community once every 6 months, to put on enormous shows and let a company like Rockefeller sponsor the event, Hawaii Rockefeller. Number one, it's black. Number two, you don't already know this black British mentality. We don't like to support underground, homegrown grassroots movements. And we're more so bedazzled by international American products. So I suggest we extract the benefits and use it to our advantage. Let the latest, hottest rap act perform at the event. Overcharge these tickets by at least 30%. Let them perform at the schools, charge £15 per head. Shipping Nike 110s from Taiwan, sell them at a £30 discount. Look, when they're made for like $5 or less, we'll still be making profits. Then we can galvanize this money, use it into purchasing building assets, creating full-time schools for our children under a strict black curriculum, giving them aim and purpose from young ages, and every single organization will be required to provide trained teachers. Therefore, we could provide a global worldview African perspective. Required reading in psychology, Dr. Francis Cress Wilson and Naim Akbar. History, John Henry Clark, Sheikh Anta Diop, Anthony T. Browder. RE, Minister Farrakhan, who is God's religious lecture. Let our homegrown leaders and scholars head the departments, resurrecting and reconnecting with Africa, led by brother leader Mbandaka. Head of Historical Research, Femi Biko and Robin Walker. Film and Media Studies, brother Hakeem, the film doctor. Send out our poets to secondary schools to recruit, reclaim the failing in our centers of youth. Have Origin and Al Cableland head African rites of passage programs, abolish sex education, replace it with family training, responsibilities of fathers, expectations of mothers, manhood and womanhood training to get these young people bothered. Have our young boys get reacquainted with the African female warrior spirit. Let them internalize fantastic female scholars. Sister Queen Afra, Sister Marima Annie, Sister Ava Muhammad and all the others. Then when they come of age, we'll start partaking in arranged marriages. Now I know, this is something that may be controversial. But in our current climate, we can't be 50 to 60 years old still talking about how we're waiting for someone special. This is serious. This is serious nation building, and upon this plan, every segment of our community is included. Go into prisons, dialogue with the inmates, required reading and viewing Malcolm X for everyone present. bringing the Nation of Islam to instill some discipline. Have entrepreneurs and business owners sit down with drug dealers 3 years before their release, school them about the nature of legal business. Then upon achieving freedom, start feeding them into the creation of businesses. For example, merging the barbershops and hairdressers, arguably they're the black community's most successful type of business. Begin selling hair products, and with their profits, start purchasing corner shops. But with the aim of it being developed into supermarkets, right across the road from sporting centres, right next door to musical outlets, right across the road from healthy fast food options. Let this money keep going round, and in a few years have a place renamed Africa Town. We've done... Ghanaians and Nigerians, Eritreans and Ethiopians, so-called West Indians and Black Britons, don't worry, only for now we'll call them that. After the Manifesto Part 2, they'd want to be reclaiming all of Africa back. But for now, let these coconuts and sellouts chastise us. Let them say how we're deluded and we're not going to make it. Remember, the man who built pyramids was probably ridiculed from starting off with 1 brick. But my words, when these strategies start working, these same said sellouts will want to join in. And you know what? We'll accept them. Because Martin Luther King taught us about the beauty of forgiving. But Minister Farrakhan taught us about the beauty of atoning. So yes, we'll accept them black, but not without a healthy Farah Malcolm exorcism. We'll let them Black Panthers do with them. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, the time is here, the time is now. And if this to you makes perfect sense, then mark your cards. Tuck Star for president.
Tendamwari Kings and Queens, you're tuned into Africa Speaks with Al Kebulan on the Big G Galaxy, the only de-brainwashing station, and that was the one and only Tug Star from the Best Kept Secret Spoken Word Collective. Our subject today is how can we make Pan-Africanism more practical, and that was a snippet, a short excerpt from the Best Kept Secret classic presentation, Tug Star for a President, Kings and Queens. As you can hear in artistic form, he broke down a very, very practical program for how we can galvanize our community behind social development and economic empowerment, Kings and Queens. That was brilliant. And that's only a short excerpt, a short excerpt. So we big up for that. That was our cultural contribution for this evening. And prior to that, I said we were paying homage to our great Baba Kwame Ture, who was breaking down for us the importance of organization and mobilization, Kings and Queens, the differences between the two and the purposes they serve. And I would like to suggest that when it comes to organization in principle and in practice, Baba Kwame Ture is one of the greatest fountains of wisdom that we can go to as a source of inspiration. He is forever full of revolutionary optimism, and when you listen to him, you will believe that the revolution is coming tomorrow, as we should believe, Kings and Queens, because it is that conviction that will see us as successful in this fight. But we turn our attention to our primary show for this evening, Kings and Queens, and tonight we ask the question: how can we make Pan-Africanism more practical? Tenda Mwale. In our 5th installment for our Africa Liberation Day specials, Africa Speaks will engage in some sharp self-critique of the Pan-African movement at home and abroad. We live in an era in which the phrase "we need to stop talking and start doing" can be heard in many a Pan-African meeting, and though the statement and those who repeat it may be considered questionable, it does speak to a certain perception of Pan-Africanists as long-winded intellectuals who do little to manifest the worth of their words in action. This, however, was not always the case. The template for Pan-African organization was no doubt set by the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and his organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, UNIA, ACL. When Papa Garvey said, "It is necessary for the Negro to pay close attention to developing the appreciation for institutional life, it is incumbent upon him that he also have and control his own institutions based upon his own cultural and civilized idealisms," Papa Garvey certainly was not joking. Though often ridiculed for the pomp and pageantry surrounding its street parades, accusing Garveyite meetings of being nothing but a talk shop would have been very difficult to prove. The UNIA ACO had under its auspices the Negro Factories Incorporated, which through housing grocery stores, laundrettes, factories for dressmaking and doll making, among other things, a printing press, restaurants, and even farms, the UNIA ACO were able to employ over 1,000 Africans in the New York borough of Harlem alone. This would be the equivalent of Africans employing over 1,000 Africans in Peckham, for example. The Black Star Line, Black Cross nurses, African legionnaires, juveniles, and African Orthodox Church speak to the operations of a comprehensive organization that was indeed universal in its approach to liberating African people by addressing every possible area of people activity. Based upon a significant measure of success, the UNIA ACO was able to launch a $2 million investment program in Africa, which eventually sent $50,000 worth of industrial equipment to Liberia in 1924. Despite this program and the Black Star Line being effectively destroyed by the forces of global white supremacy, the UNIA ACO was able to amass the funds among the masses of the people to establish another shipping line, the Black Cross Navigation Company, based on the strength of the people in the vision of a liberated Africa. It would be true to say, however, that with greater resources and less overt restrictions in comparison to the UNIA ACL, no Pan-African organization of today can boast such achievements. While COINTELPRO and Western intelligence paved the way for destabilized communities and neo-colonial governments throughout the African world, the entire concept and viability of Pan-Africanism has come into question. Yet, by all historical indicators, Africa's last period of significant political, economic, social, and cultural growth was championed by its great Pan-African leaders, such as Nkrumah, Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, and the movements of men, women, and children they led. The same can be said for the Caribbean island of Grenada under the leadership of Maurice Bishop and the New Jewel movement. It would therefore appear ludicrous that the concept of organization and leadership comes under so much fire, often even in Pan-African circles. Perhaps a self-indictment on the fact that we on the whole are not achieving the very things we celebrate our historical greats for. So tonight we ask the question, how can we make Pan-Africanism more practical? Do our people even know what Pan-Africanism is? What is Pan-Africanism designed to achieve? Why are the movements of today not as productive as their predecessors? Is Pan-Africanism now a dead ideology that has or has not served its purpose? Is it time for us to re-evaluate our practice of Pan-Africanism in order to make it more effective? As said earlier, kings and queens, our special guest from Azania, South Africa, is Baba Buntu, founder and executive director of the Ebukhosini Solutions, a community development capacity building organization based in Azania, South Africa, specializing in cultural events, education, training, production, management, and social entrepreneurship. Yes, indeed, kings and queens. That is our show for this evening. So do stay locked on. Before we get to Baba Buntu, we thought it would be good to engage in some political education, because as we asked in the question in our summary, do our people know what Pan-Africanism is? And two of our greats, the first being Baba Kwame Ture, who we heard from earlier, says that we must always be engaged in the political education of our people because our enemies are always politicizing us. Very, very important. Once again, kings and queens, we must always be engaged in the political education of our people because our enemies are always politicizing us. And secondly, Baba Amos Wilson says nothing works like a good theory, kings and queens. He always encourages us to work out the metaphysics of our program before the physics of our program to ensure that our theory is sound before putting it into practice, kings and queens. So we're going to be dealing with first and foremost political education. Then we're going to hear from Baba Buntu. And finally, we thought it would be necessary to end on a positive note in terms of highlighting some of the positive examples of practical Pan-Africanism currently taking place in the African community in the UK. We will by no means be exhausting the list, but we're just going to highlight a few examples, kings and queens, and things that our community at large can get involved in. So as said, this is the fifth and final edition of our Africa Liberation Day series for this year, 2016, and we felt we're going to be dealing with Pan-Africanism now and defining it and going into it and explaining it from the nationalist Pan-Africanist perspective, which is the political ideology of the Al-Kebulan revivalist movement under the leadership of brother leader Bandaka. So we're going to be giving a nationalist Pan-Africanist definition of Pan-Africanism, but suffice to say that because there are varieties of definitions and understandings and perspectives within Pan-Africanism, but suffice to say that there are more similarities than differences between these varying perspectives, kings and queens. So we are of the understanding that what we will present will be not too dissimilar or far removed from other people who profess to be Pan-Africanists, whether they be individuals or organizations. And we do hope that our session today will contribute to the widening and understanding and overstanding and appreciation for Pan-Africanism, what it is designed to achieve, and also how it developed. But we are celebrating Africa Liberation Day, and as a part of the Al-Kebulan revivalist movement philosophy and program, we like to define what liberation is. If we say liberation is our goal, if we say liberation is our objective, we should be about the business of knowing what liberation means. So we define liberation as the acquisition of the power to be masters of our own destiny. This means to have control over every aspect of our lives with the capacity to define, defend, and develop ourselves, thus determining our own destiny. Once again, kings and queens, by liberation we mean the acquisition of the power to be masters of our own destiny. This means to have control over every aspect of our lives with the capacity to define, defend, and develop ourselves, thus determining our own destiny. Brother leader Bandaka teaches us that in another sense, this means that we have mastery over every aspect of the African life cycle, from the womb to the tomb and beyond, kings and queens. So we are brought into the world within the context of our own culture and our own liberated minds, and we are initiated into manhood and womanhood. First of all, we are named according to our own culture and our own history and our identity. We are initiated into manhood and womanhood as a part of a process that speaks to meeting our culture and also meeting the political and social aims of the African race, globally and locally, kings and queens. Yeah. So going further, kings and queens, we like to identify what we call euphemisms, euphemisms, which are weak terms aimed to trivialize, neutralize, pacify, and divert us from total liberation. And some of you may recognize or be familiar with these terms. They are independence, democracy, equality, integration, assimilation, reform, anti-apartheid, anti-colonialism, anti-slavery, abolition, civil rights, human rights, equal opportunities, justice, positive discrimination, humanism, humanitarianism, universalism, racial harmony, multiracialism, multiculturalism, cultural diversity, progress, socialism, and liberalism. And we say these are weak terms, kings and queens, euphemisms that represent sometimes movements or social modalities that are designed to divert us from total liberation. Yeah, so sometimes we get caught up in trying to assimilate into the system or seeking civil rights and all manner of different things, or justice for a particular issue, as Baba Kwame Ture was explaining earlier, getting caught up on a single issue or injustice around that single issue and forget or take our eyes off the ball in terms of total liberation. And the point is that some of these things, there's nothing wrong, for example, with being humanitarian. There's nothing wrong with equal opportunity, so to speak. But if we pursue equal opportunities at the expense of liberation, we are going to remain an oppressed people. And this is very necessary for us to note, because on the global scale, kings and queens, whereas Kwame Nkrumah in the independence of Ghana spoke about the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent, liberation being the operative term. He's drawing a distinction here between independence and liberation. What does that distinction mean? And Baba Patrice Lumumba spoke about making the Congo a beacon light towards the liberation of the entire African continent. Yeah, this was his speech on the independence of Congo. So both of these great African leaders are making the distinction between the independence that they had just achieved and the liberation that they were continuing to fight for. And in this day and age, whereas that generation and the generations immediately following were talking about African liberation, which was a concept defined by African people in the interest of African people, today, in the decline of those revolutionary movements, the talk is democracy. We want to institute democracy in Africa. And this is the great challenge that African governments in particular are battling to achieve, installing democracy, and more specifically, Westminster democracy. Then now we have another word called development, which is the economic term, kings and queens, relating to how institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and other institutions, kings and queens, like the UN, quote unquote invest or provide aid to Africa, and therefore African development is defined by the gross national product, which is an economic marker defined by the West, Europe and America. And there's also globalization, which is the cultural terminology, that is based upon the fact that we now live in an information age in which European culture is being exported to the world more than it ever has been before, and the world is gouging galvanizing and developing itself along the lines of how much it can invest in what the European world calls globalization. Yeah, kings and queens. Okay, so this is the global rule of the world under European cultural domination, kings and queens. And it's very important that we look into these things, because we celebrate Africa Liberation Day every year and often fail to analyze, appreciate and define or remind ourselves what liberation actually means. Okay, kings and queens, now we're going to go forward and define nationalist Pan-Africanism, kings and queens. Nationalist Pan-Africanism, as defined, as brought to us by the spiritual leader of the Al-Qibla Revivalist movement, brother Leader Bandaka. Okay, so we define first and foremost, kings and queens, nationalism, and I'm going to give brief explanations. Yeah, brief explanations, but it's necessary for us to do more work on this. But first and foremost, nationalism: African people building and maintaining autonomous nations and communities with institutions designed to promote, preserve, and protect African lives by any means necessary, kings and queens. Once again, we say nationalism is African people building and maintaining autonomous nations and communities with institutions designed to promote, preserve, and protect African lives by any means necessary. Autonomous. The word autonomous relates to self-governance, kings and queens. You are not governed by anybody but yourself. And not only are you not governed by anybody but yourself, no other people's culture, politics, or economic interest govern you other than your own. Another word that relates to autonomy is the word sovereignty, which is a word that is becoming popularized in Pan-Africanist circles. I know certainly among us in the UNIA ACL under the leadership of President General Senghor Jawara Baye, and this concept is being promoted by our ambassador of race first sovereign development, which is Mama Marimba Ani, kings and queens. And so the concept of nationalism speaks to the fact that wherever African people are in the world, we should see ourselves as a part of one nation. Nations relating to where lands that we own and control, communities relating to wherever we are. So even if we are in a land that we do not own and control, that we are organized and recognize our nationhood as African people anywhere we are, kings and queens. And in those communities, we must build institutions to serve our needs. As Baba John Henrik Clark says, a people rise and fall within the context of institutions. Okay, we go on to say that nationalism is founded upon one fundamental principle and 7 essential principles. The fundamental principle is race first, meaning race awareness and cultural emancipation first, putting the survival and prosperity of our people and culture before all other considerations. This being the only logical and viable response to the worldwide racial oppression and genocide facing us as a people, kings and queens. As Papa Garvey says, in a world of wolves, one must go armed. And one of the most powerful defensive weapons within reach of African people is the practice of race first in all parts of the world. Yes, put your race first like all other races do, kings and queens. You know, great historian Baba John Henrik Clark teaches that Africans are well integrated with each other. You know, they always say that, you know, Africa is a vast continent with all kind of different people in it. And he's saying to us, Baba Yusuf Benyakannon says to us that really and truly Africans are well integrated with each other. That means that throughout history, we have traveled around the African continent and built families among each other. So we, as Africans existing today, are the manifestation of many groups of African people that have been producing great Africans throughout millennia, kings and queens. So we give thanks for our strong genes and our African ancestry. So that's the fundamental principle of nationalism. And then we have 7 essential principles. The first being a proud heritage, proud heritage, valuing and restoring African heritage, land, history, culture, spirituality as our only true source of identity, philosophy, ideology, resources, and self-empowerment. This is very important, kings and queens, because it is important. No people have ever built great nation and civilization based upon the greatness of another people. All people that have built great nations and civilization have done it from a elevated sense of self, kings and queens. And so because throughout the Ma'afa, the invasion, conquest, colonization, kidnapping, rape, and enslavement of African people, land, history, and culture, we have been subjected to a state of what Mama Joy de Grey calls vacant esteem. We do not see ourselves, our physical image, our history, our culture as something to be proud of. So an essential aspect of nationalism or nationalist Pan-Africanism is to reinstitute pride in the African heritage, history, culture, land, spirituality, kings and queens. The second essential principle is self-governance. Complete control, rulership, and leadership of African nations, communities, institutions, and resources by African people in the interest of African people. I will come back to that one right there when we begin to talk about neo-colonialism. Then we have self-reliance, which means depending upon our own resources, human and material, and institutions for the production and distribution of goods and services to fulfill our own needs and desires. This relates to our economic empowerment, kings and queens. The fourth principle is separatism or separation, which means exclusiveness or exclusivity in philosophy, ideology, and organization, as opposed to integration and assimilation into the systems, societies, philosophies, and institutions of others. This basically reinforcing the fact that because we have been an oppressed people, we need an ideology that speaks to our experience exclusively, and we need a philosophy that enables to empower ourselves, exclusively, so that we are able to stand on our own 2 feet, not just economically, but also ideologically and also culturally. The fifth principle, kings and queens, essential principle, is self-defense. Papa Omowale Malcolm X was very vociferous in teaching this particular principle, kings and queens, defending ourselves by any means necessary against all forms of oppression and exploitation or threats to obtaining and maintaining our liberation. Understanding, kings and queens, that the attack against the African has not ended. And so therefore we need to institute means to defend ourselves in all areas of people activity. The sixth essential principle is land acquisition, striving for the acquisition of land at home and abroad as a sacred right, as well as the basis of nationhood, power, revolution, and therefore our total liberation. In his message to the grassroots, Papa Omowale Malcolm X again is very, very vociferous in teaching that land is the basis of power and independence, kings and queens. And as African people, we have a very, very special relationship with our land, and our land was taken from us. So we have to be about the business of reacquiring our land from those who have stolen it. And last and finally, kings and queens, we have the principle of repatriation, which is the process of returning all African people in mind, soul, and body ultimately to Mama Africa as our natural homeland. You know, one time I had a conversation with Brother Leader Bandaka. We were talking about, I suggested that reparations should be one of the essential principles, that there should be 8, and reparations should be added to the essential principles. And his response to me was that essentially all of these 7 principles relate to and encompass self-repair, kings and queens. Reparations under the banner of self-repair. So I humbled myself to that particular wisdom right there, but I just wanted to point out that reparations is a part of the philosophy of nationalist Pan-Africanism. So we define nationalism, kings and queens, And now we're going to define Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, we define in the Al-Qaeda revivalist movement as the total liberation and reunification of Africa and all African people under an autonomous Ma'atian, we're going to come back to that, world government and system. This is a variation on a definition of Pan-Africanism that was provided by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Brother Leader Bandaka used to be a member of the AAPRP's study program, and so he learned this a variation of this definition whilst a part of that study program. But the difference is that, and this is where the variation comes in, the difference is that the AAPRP, where we have Ma'at or Ma'atian, has scientific socialism. Yeah, so whereas we say the total liberation and reunification of Africa and all African people under an autonomous Ma'atian world system and government, the AAPRP would say under scientific socialism. Yeah, and the Al-Qaeda revivalist movement, we don't regard ourselves to be socialist. That's another debate for another time, for political as well as cultural reasons. But we even between what we mean when we say Ma'atian and what our socialist brothers and sisters mean when they say scientific socialism, even that we recognize there to be some similarity and unification. But again, I said the differences we debate another time, kings and queens. So there we see a fundamental idea that African people, wherever we are on the planet, are one people and should recognize ourselves as one people. And we have been separated, disseminated, and our peoplehood has been destroyed as a part of that separation. And so the Pan-African program, an idea is designed to reunify us for the purpose of us liberating ourselves. And the term Pan-Africanism was coined in 1900 under the leadership of Baba Henry Sylvester Williams. The idea was around prior to 1900s with people like Martin Delaney, people like Edward Wilmot Blyden, people like David Walker, who were ministering before 1900. But this is the date at which people say the term Pan-Africanism itself was coined. But people actually date Pan-Africanism back thousands of years before that to the uniting of upper and lower Kemet kings and queens. This is what people regard to be a historical focal point in terms of charting the beginning of Pan-Africanism. There are others that suggest that it actually goes back before that, but that is one of the popular starting points. As we move forward in the Al-Qaeda revivalist movement, we identify three central themes of Pan-Africanism. The first one being Africa for the Africans, at home and abroad. All descendants of Africa are its only natural and rightful citizens, owners and rulers, and must therefore reaffirm this legacy. That particular principle is very, very important, especially in an era in which invaders known as settlers on the African continent are now trying to fix themselves into the African identity. The second central theme is look to Africa. All African people must be Africa focused. Yeah, spiritually, culturally, politically, economically, and intellectually as the only authentic source of our philosophy. And finally, one creator, one Jah, one aim, one destiny. All Africans are one in blood and spirit and must thus unite continentally and globally towards one spiritual, cultural, political and economic objective. This one is very important, kings and queens, if we understand the importance of spirituality to African life, culture and social organization, kings and queens. Okay, so this is our breakdown of Pan-Africanism, just a brief breakdown of Pan-Africanism, more specifically nationalist Pan-Africanism, kings and queens, by way of political education for our people. Now we are going to hear from our international guest, Baba Buntu, who is going to nice and easy break down the concept of practical Pan-Africanism as we engage in some self-critique regarding our Pan-African movements and organizations and how we can make ourselves more effective. This is Africa Speaks with Al-Kebulan on Galaxy Radio, the only de-brainwashing station. Tendai Mwade.
Yo, this is Swiss So Solid, Africa speaks with our cable and Galaxy 102.5. Blaze the fire, 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 fire.
Tonight, Warrior Kings and Queens, before we get into this interview with Baba Buntu, we just had to apologize for some of the technical difficulties that resulted in our Skype call with him not being as smooth as it could have been. So there is a little bit of a interference with the call, but we persevered as much as possible, and we have an assurance that Baba Buntu will be back to expound upon this most important subject at a later date. But we thought it was important enough to share it with you anyway. So here it is, Kings and Queens, Baba Buntu on practical Pan-Africanism. Tendai Mwari. Okay, Tendai Mwari, Kings and Queens, you're tuning into Africa Speaks with Al Kebulan on Galaxy Radio, the only brainwashing station, and we are joined all the way live from Azania, South Africa, by our international superstar Pan-Africanist, Baba Buntu. Greetings, Tendai Mwari, Baba Buntu.
Greetings and Izwuletu, the land belongs to Africa. Greetings to all Galaxy listeners and all Africans globally.
Yes, indeed, Baba. Now we have you on to deal with the most important topic, and that is the subject of practical Pan-Africanism. And we was inspired to do this because we saw that you were ministering on this particular subject matter in South Africa recently, and we're always looking for ways to make our political ideologies more practical. Let me ask you first and foremost, what inspired you to put together such a presentation or workshop?
Well, thank you so much for the question. I think first and foremost, Pan-Africanism has always inspired me. I think the ideas, the ideologies, the concepts, the philosophies that are engraved in Pan-African writings and practices from Garvey to so many others that have given us a script of what Pan-Africanism can and must be.
Yes.
I think I've chosen to carry that as not just as intellectual baggage that I can use to flaunt and posture and try to present myself as somebody who has a big head. Mm-hmm. I think more for me it's a reminder of the humbleness and the practicality that we need to implement it with. And I think, I always refer back to Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey.
Yes.
When I feel that I'm stuck on ideas, when I feel things are not moving and I think that I'm having it hard, and I look at what Garvey was facing and what he went through, and how he was always thinking big at the same time as he was listening to what people were saying, maybe not always articulating, but saying through their actions, through their aspirations, and through the things that they were going through as challenges at the time.
Yes.
And I think when I do that, I'm reminded that yes, I have challenges in my life. We have challenges as organizations, mm-hmm. but I think we also have a more robust possibility. We are speaking now thousands of miles away, and we can connect. We can inspire each other.
Yeah.
I don't have to travel for days to meet you, and then that is a possibility in itself. And I feel that my main inspiration for this topic is that I feel as African people we are not serving and honoring Mama Africa the way she expects us to, and we need to get with the program.
So, Baba Buntu, the subject might sound important to many of us here, because for many, inside and outside of the Pan-Africanist movement, the idea of practicality is not an idea that is generally associated with Pan-Africanism or Pan-Africanists. Would you say that is a viable or justifiable perception, or is it an unjustified perception?
I do not agree with that position at all, but I am aware of it, and I understand that in a limited way it also has a place. I think it is important that we have thinkers, that we have philosophies, that we have even conferences where we think about strategy, where we understand positions and philosophies, when we understand who we are. All of those conversations are very important for our intellectual growth and ideas. I think there's a beautiful aspect to it. But I think what upsets me is that I want us to be responsible here. I feel that to a certain extent we have allowed Pan-Africanism to become almost only an intellectual construct of ideas. And when we have put a lot of great ideas on the table or in a book, we walk away feeling we have done the work. And I feel that, no, that's just making an agenda for what's to come. Yes. And I think what's to come should be even more important than how to design going there, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
Meaning that when we have put the script down, that's when the work starts. That's when we put these things into committees. That's when we put this into task teams. That's when we put this into timelines. That's when we put this.
Okay, we've got a little bit of a problem with the Skype.
This into budget allocations, and we get on with the program. I cannot even be upset with young people who say they don't understand Pan-Africanism and they don't relate to it. Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I cannot even be upset with young people, young Africans who are saying they don't understand Pan-Africanism and they don't really see the value of it, because we are not doing a very good job at demonstrating how it works. And if we think about it, people tend to embrace ideas that they can see work. So if we are not, and I'm not saying we're not trying, because a lot of people are trying and a lot of people are involved in this as well. I'm not saying it's not being done, but I just say it's not done sufficiently. Yeah. And if Pan-Africanism appears to be this space of just talking and philosophizing about ideas, about how to do stuff, but not actually doing it, then I can't be upset with young people for saying this doesn't make sense to me. So I think there's a skewed a reality here where Pan-Africanism has been allowed to become this a discussion amongst intellectuals and not necessarily be highlighted in the proper way that it should as a practice.
Interesting. All right, before we get into the meat or the veg, so to speak, of the subject, we are doing this as a part of our ALD season, our Africa Liberation Day season. This is part 5. And a worthy conclusion to the season, I must add. But I want to know if there are any observances taking place in South Africa for Africa Liberation Day.
Sorry, just repeat that question.
I was asking
Hello?
if, yes, can you
please repeat the question? Yeah.
Yes, Baba. I was asking if there are any observances taking place in South Africa for Africa Liberation Day.
Oh yes. Well, there are a number of marking of Africa Liberation Day and month as such. I mean, the South African government has declared May as Africa Month,
right?
Which has some nice aspects to it, but I feel that the sad part of that is that it often then just turns into government-sponsored fluffy presentations where we just have a little bit of dance, a little bit of speeches that are not really going anywhere, and we clap hands and then we feel we are celebrating Africa, which I don't think Africa Liberation Day is supposed to be about.
Yes, sir.
So I wouldn't say that there's a lot of events marking the day, but there are some attempts in several communities to highlight the day and to also put some substance into reflecting where are we as an African nation.
All right, well, let's put the substance to it now, Baba Buntu. In terms of practical Pan-Africanism, and I see in terms of what you have to speak on, it's first and foremost the importance of understanding power. Let's break that down for us, Baba Buntu.
Okay. So this is how I see it. As African people, we have walked for a very long time and existed for a very long time on this planet. And we have had many challenges. We have had many periods where we have lost what we achieved, where we have struggled with how to maintain our knowledge, our technologies, our sciences, and all of that. But we have always risen. We have always found solutions. And I believe that the time we live in now is probably the first time that we seem completely stuck. I mean, if you look at this, it seems like we are not really moving at all. It seems we're just talking about moving, but we're not really making progress. And that, to me, if I look at what makes the last 500 years, this particular challenge that we're dealing with now, different than other challenges that we have faced before, is that this one is so deeply about power, hegemonic global power. And if we don't understand power, it's going to be difficult for us to stand up to the system that has designed for us to fall. When we say that Africa and Africans are failing to, and then we fill in to have democracy, to have good leaders, to have a viable economy, things like that, it's not that we are just failing. There's a design that is supposed to make sure that we don't rise.
Yes.
So we need to understand, and I have outlined three aspects of power that I think it's very important that we use Pan-Africanism to create answers to. One is the power to unite, the other one is the power to deconstruct, and the third one is the power to build. I will just say something very quickly about each one.
Yes, sir.
The power to unite means these are actually achievable powers even if we don't have a lot of resources. It's not forbidden to unite as African people. There's no law against it. There might be many pressures and many ways of discouraging unity and many ways of trying to make sure that unity doesn't work.
Yes.
But it's not illegal, and there's nothing that really stops us from a position of having a will to unite. And if we have that will, it means that it will actually present itself not just as flowery speeches in conferences, because we keep talking about unity. Unity will actually be something that results in us working towards an economic superpower. It will present itself in us working together constructively on a daily basis. So the power to unite is a very important aspect of that. Remember that by us losing and misunderstanding and losing the understanding of land, God, and mind, that has put us in a very dangerous position. We are dangerous to ourselves.
Right. God, land, and mind.
That's right. God, land, and mind. Those are three very important aspects of us for our purpose. Without land, without God, without mind, it's completely impossible for an African to formulate a useful purpose.
Yes.
So it's important that we bring these understandings back. That's the power to unite. Secondly, the power to deconstruct, meaning we need to grapple with issues and break them down into pieces. We can't just say we want a great black economy. What does it take to do that? How do we set that up? Who does that? And what are the things that we can do? What are the things that we struggle to do? Are we making plans? Are we positioning ourselves to carry those plans out? So we need to deconstruct, because we live with a lot of constructed power walls that keep making us to fail. Thirdly, power to build, meaning having an understanding of how we use strategy, how we use spirituality, and how we use our operations. And I will get into that just in a moment. But my point here is just to say we need to, Pan-Africanism to me must be a template, or templates. I'm not against having a diversity of ideas around this as well.
Yes.
But it must deliver tools that we can use to create the power to unite, the power to deconstruct, and the power to build. And why I'm choosing these three aspects is, if you think about it, all of these aspects are, at least in certain ways, maybe not fully, but in certain ways available to us, within our families, within our communities, within us coming up with practical ideas for schooling for our children, when it comes to setting up economic systems, when it comes to setting up a farm and toil the land. These things are actually possible to do. So, and that's where I want to keep the discussion, because yes, we want everybody in the whole world, every African person, to sit around the same, table of communication and interaction, but that might not happen tomorrow. So I want to deal with the things that we can do now.
Okay. Now some might say these things are easier said than done, because if they were so easy, we would have been doing them. What do you say to that, Baba?
No, I agree. I think part of why we tremble with our solutions is that we have been with these problems and these challenges for such a long time that we almost take them as normal. It's normal when we see black failure. It's normal when we see black people antagonize and fight. It's normal when we see black people not being able to unite. We have seen much more of that than to see us actually doing what we must. So for me, we need to locate that in a will. I'm not sure if all of us has the will to create this power that we need as African people. I think many of us have the wish, many of us have the dream, many of us have the thought, many of us have the concept, and we do it, and we have those concepts and ideas very eloquently. But I'm not sure if every one of us have the will, because if I have the will to do this, it will completely mark how I live my daily life. It's not something that I talk about when ShakaRa Tafadzwa when he invites me on radio. It's something that you should find me doing 11 o'clock p.m., 10 a.m. Anytime you come unannounced to visit me, this is what you should find me doing. So I think it's really about us taking a position. And you know, Tafadzwa, I have to start somewhere. I have to start with me. I have to start with the family that I'm part of. I have to start with the community that I represent. If I'm not doing anything there, I don't really see the reason why I should travel far to go to a conference to give cute speeches. If I don't practice what I teach, I think that's a questionable type of leadership. And my community should hold me responsible. They should hold me accountable to that. Why are you talking so much? Why are you not doing more?
Most definitely. All right. That leads nicely onto our second stage, which is Pan-African power sources. So once we've developed I'm assuming it goes like, once we've developed the ability to unite, deconstruct and build, what we build is therefore Pan-African power sources. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. Expand, Baba.
And the Pan-African power sources. Yes. So the next level then is, where do we draw our powers from? Where do they sit? Where do we find them? How do we bring them into existence? Operation I will symbolize by the hand. I will explain. Strategic power means.
Sorry, Baba. We kind of lost you there for a sec. If you could rewind to the beginning of when you answer. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So we're talking about the Pan-African power sources. Where do we take our power from? How do we bring power into existence? And I'm looking at three ways we can and must do that. One is strategic power, and I'm symbolizing that with the mind. Second, spiritual power. I'm symbolizing that with the heart. Thirdly, operational power, and I'm symbolizing that with the hand. I will explain. Strategic power, the mind. Are we really shaping our minds full of incredible practical ideas? And if we are not, what am I doing to fill in the blanks? So if I talk, for instance, a lot about how we must set up an African-centered school.
Okay, brothers and sisters, we've got a little bit of a technical right there. We're going to try and get Baba Buntu back as soon as possible. As you can hear, he's breaking it down very, very beautifully right about now in terms of how we can make our Pan-Africanism more a practical, excellent feedback and breakdown so far. So we're going to be getting some advice into how we get over that mental blockage that stops us from building the school after we begin to speak about it. Kings and queens, you are tuned into Galaxy Radio, Africa Speaks, with our Kebalan, the only de-brainwashing station, and we are addressing the subject of practical Pan-Africanism. Baba Buntu?
Hello?
I can hear you. Good.
This is so frustrating.
I know, I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, you can't even apologize. It's almost like somebody's sitting here just deciding for this not to work because I've had such a good connection the whole day.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, that's why we need practical Pan-Africanism, so we can build our own Skype.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. All right, we'll persevere for as long as we can. Yeah.
True.
What's it? So you started by saying something about a school, building a black school, and getting over the mental, getting to from the theoretical to the practical.
Right. So this, actually, to use another language, I could say this is about our power fitness. Are we fit to take on the power that we need to enact our ideas? Right. So when it comes to the mind, am I equipping myself? Am I exercising my mind? And am I being aware of my blind spots? Am I being aware of what I keep talking about but not doing. Because if I'm not, I will become dysfunctional. I will become somebody who just talks about great ideas, but I don't enact them. So it's not just about what I put into my mind, but what I do with what I put into the mind and what kind of things that I engage with.
Yeah.
So that's the strategic power. Then the spiritual power. And this is not, this depends, we are a diverse African people, let's just agree. Spirituality means that for me to work in my community and do something practical, I need to have a deep sense of African love for my people. And that means I need to engage emotionally, psychologically, with my determination. I cannot say, I will work with other black people if they support me. I will work with other black people if they love me. I will work with other African... Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
So spiritual power is then a position that I'm taking emotionally and psychologically that I am going to work for my people. Knowing that I might not always be acknowledged. I might not always be liked. I might not always be given the credit that maybe my ego wishes that I could have. This is a position that I'm taking because I love my people. And I understand that we are a wounded people in many ways. And that sometimes the people that I wish to speak nicely and lovely to me might not do that. And might even walk away from what I do. And I make a commitment that even when people walk away, I'm not going to give up. I'm just going to change and learn how to change my methodology so that I can do what I feel I'm called to do. So that is spiritual power, the ability to integrate metaphysical, ancestral, and even ritual realities.
Yes.
And of course, this means different things to people, because some of us are so brainwashed that we get scared when we hear words like this. But I think it's also about understanding that rituals in the African sense were not put there for magic. They were not put there for strange things. They were put there for very practical purposes. Right. If we are a people who hurt each other a lot, there's a ritual way that we need to cleanse that. We cannot just talk about, we shouldn't do this, we must stop being hurtful to each other. If we are, and if we keep hurting each other and upsetting each other and violating each other, we must also find ways to cleanse away from that.
Buntu,
and that gives us power. It sets power free.
This is very interesting what you're saying, because for many people, when they hear practical, what you're outlining here, sounds very much the opposite of practical. It sounds like you're trying to suspend us in a worship experience, you know what I'm saying? And many people don't see the practicality of spirituality. Just for those who would have that critique, what would you say?
Thank you so much for the question. And I know that many of us have our guards up against spirituality, at least for two things. One, that we have been forced into a very particular form of spiritual practice, which often comes in the form of Christendom and other religions that were imposed on us. So when we have an awakening, maybe we want to actually leave the whole realm of spirituality altogether. And I think secondly, because there are people who also take advantage of our vulnerability as Africans. So even there are people who also come masked as spiritual African, spiritual warriors who can save us from all this Eurocentricity and all of that, but they are not doing it for the genuine reasons. So here I'm not talking about spirituality in the sense of forming or belonging to a particular, let me call it doctrine, or a particular gospel, or a particular way of praying, or anything like this. What I'm saying is able to work with each other. The easiest way that I can exemplify that is when I talk about African love. Love in the sense of not romantic love, but love in the sense of loving my people, which is a political position that I'm taking, knowing that I might not get praised, I might not always be welcomed, but I commit. And that's an example of a spirituality that doesn't have anything to do with particular prayers or particular rituals, but it becomes ritualistic in the sense that I put myself before my people. I study my people so that I understand what this woundedness has done, and I still stand, I still reach out, I still engage because I believe in this. So there's a faith aspect to that. I have faith in my people, even if they don't always give me an easy reason to have it.
Yes. Interesting. All right. That's so that would directly speak to then our ability to work with each other. To be able to engage in rituals of healing is practical in the sense that it works. It increases our workability. Is what I hear you say.
That's right. And secondly, because we have many beautiful beginnings of projects. I mean, I think we've all been to the inauguration or the launch of an incredible project, and it's beautiful for a couple of months, maybe even a couple of years, and then it starts to go sour. How many of us have been part of the same organization for more than 10 years? How many of us have stood loyally fighting, even if it's not a perfect organization, to say that I'm going to be here until I see that it really works. I'm not going to leave. Many of us have been to organizations for a year, for 2 years, and we leave because we are already exhausted. So it's all also about sustainability. That was my point.
Okay, no, that is a beautiful point, and I'm sure one that speaks to the reality of many of our listeners. So we give thanks for that. Searching and precise and incisive questions that you're asking there, Baba Buntu. All right, let's go on to our third pillar, which is examples of how to implement Pan-African practicality. Let's expand upon that a little bit.
Okay, we will do that, but I just want to mention quickly that next to strategic power and spiritual power, we also have the operational power, which I symbolize.
Yes. Go ahead. Thank you.
No problem. So in addition to strategic power and spiritual power, we also have the operational power, which I symbolize with the hand. And I hope you also notice that I've used very simplistic symbols here, saying the mind must connect with the heart, and that again must connect with the hand. So there must be a flow where these three elements of my consciousness actually work in collaboration. So the hand will then be the symbol of the ability to position my skills, to organize, to reach out to people, to mobilize people, to make sure that people actually come to the things that we say we do, or that I find myself going out to the communities that need to be reached, and understanding how to implement something. So this is our planning, this is how we evaluate, this is how we operate, how we make sure that things work, and how we sustain them. So that was the third part of the sources of power. Then thirdly, we go into the examples of how to implement Pan-African practicality. And I want to mention some examples. I want to mention those that I feel we don't speak so much about. And when I single out some, it's not to say that these are the only ones we should focus on. But I want to start with self and family. We are a people who, for thousands of years, have worked very hard on having our culture, our purpose of life, our ethos linked and accentuated through our families. Our families, the family is the first school that we enter in life. So if we now have become a people, and I'm not saying this goes for everyone, let's not get stereotypical here, but I think it's not a myth, it's not a lie, that we know that many African families struggle. They struggle with taking care of each other, inspiring each other, loving each other, be loyal to each other. We struggle. We have many examples of pain that are exercised in our homes. Our homes should be, think about this, and I'm thinking especially to the audience that might find themselves in UK. When you leave your house, you're going out into a world that wants to cut you down. It wants to discourage you. It wants to make you believe that you are small, so small and so insignificant that you should even give up before you try. That's what the world you are facing every single day. So if we, inside of the houses that we live, also have weak structures, also allow ourselves to talk to each other in very demeaning ways, feel fatigued and tired and depressed before we can even reach the door handle to go out, what kind of people are we going to be? So the home must be a guided space. There's certain ways we don't talk at home. There's certain things that cannot happen in our homes. There's certain guidelines for how a family takes care of each other, has an interest in every member, builds each other, encourage every member when they keep falling, and rise together as a strong unit. Yeah. For me, that's a very important example of how we build African power. This goes into relationships, this goes into marriage, this goes into intergenerational conflict that many African families are experiencing. And I want to say something about this.
Yeah, go ahead.
ShakaRa, I think you know very well that for some reason we are kind of allowed the family space to be very, very private. Yes. So issues that happens within the family is not something we should talk about, or sometimes we don't even seek much advice about it because we feel so ashamed if we are not living up to the expectations that a family should represent. And I feel we are doing ourselves such a disfavor. We must understand that the weaknesses that we often see within our families is not a result of us being weak. It's a result of us being so marginalized, so pressed, so oppressed, so pressurized, so pushed to the margin, that is to gain strength, to build each other and set ourselves up to be changed when we leave that house and go out in the world. So that's one example. I think,
you know what, can we stay here for a sec on this family thing, because it's very important in the sense of it might, another critique of the movement, so to speak, of the Pan-African movement might be that there hasn't been enough of a focus on family. You know, and I know for example, there's a critique over here in the UK in terms of in the Pan-African community, how often you see couples in committed relationships together on the road or together in organizations, and it would suggest that, coming back to what you were saying at the beginning, that there's been a heightened focus on political ideology and theory, and probably not enough on family, on the importance of family in the development of a movement or an organization.
Hello?
I can hear you good. Can you hear me?
Okay, let's go.
Yeah, go ahead. All right,
I can hear you.
Yes, sir. I don't know where you got cut off, but you were talking about families.
So yes, that's right. So the reason I focus so much on the African family is also because we are a company here in Azania that has put the African family and its protection, its guidance, and its power at the center of every activity we do. So if we talk about entrepreneurship, we always have a link to family. If we talk about spirituality, we always link it to family. If we talk about power, if we talk about intellectualism, if we talk about production, whatever, we always link it to family. Family is the main building structure of African culture. And if we don't have powerful families, we cannot achieve what we say that we want to do. That doesn't mean that everyone has to be married. It doesn't mean that everyone must have 5 children, but it means that we need to be cognizant of the fact that we are struggling with familyhood right now. Right. And we can actually be creative to form different forms of family. We can connect better. We can take care of those who have not necessarily found a family that is functional to them. And when I'm saying that, I mean some people, when they wake up to an African consciousness, they become very lonely because their family don't understand them. Some people, when they choose certain ways of living as an African, they become an outcast in their family, so they don't feel they belong anymore. But that means that first, it means at least 2 things. It means that our organizations must also function as families. So we must get involved in our members' lives. We must provide tools and encouragement and solutions for the stuff that we have kind of called private and individual, and that should not be discussed in Pan-African places. I completely disagree with that notion, and I want us to move on it quickly. Yes. Secondly, we also need to give tools and ways of approaching these problematic spaces to young people who want to enter a relationship, who want to be parents, who want to see themselves being part of building a home. Yes. Are we giving them tools how to do this in an African way? Are we taking care of them as they struggle and grapple with what they go through inside of a relationship? Are we giving we need to really exercise some courage. And that takes me back to maybe my concluding point. we do not have access to all the power that we need to get to where we really need to go, because there's too many forces that are keeping us locked and marginalized and oppressed. But that doesn't mean that all power is completely unavailable to us. And we must take the power that we can build within our communities, within our families, within ourselves, and we must use that to find, to develop the tools, but being busy every single day to implement them.
Yo, this is Swiss So Solid. Africa Speaks with our cable and Galaxy 102.5. Blaze the fire, 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 fire.
Yes, indeed, Tendamwari Kings and Queens. This is Africa Speaks with Al Kebalan on the Big G Galaxy Radio. You just heard from our international guest, Baba Buntu from Azania, South Africa, addressing the concept of practical Pan-Africanism, Kings and Queens. Once again, apologies that the interview was kind of cut short based upon the limitations of the Skype at the time, but we will be dealing with that again. But how Baba said, so much that we could look into and that we need to develop on as Pan-Africanism becoming more practical. And it's very interesting. What interested me most about that particular interview is that when he's dealing with Pan-Africanism and practical Pan-Africanism, he went to the area of family, and that's an area that is so often neglected. But if we look on it in terms of, we keep saying that family is the basis of a nation, yeah, and so really and truly the quality of our nation building and our community development is going to be based around the strength of the families that we build. So that it doesn't really get much more practical than that. He brought down some concepts in terms of having, the head and the heart and the hand working in unison, you know what I'm saying? In terms of the mind, the soul and the body, operation, strategy and spirituality and all these kinds of things, Kings and Queens. It was a most important interview, so we give thanks to Baba Buntu for that contribution, and we look forward to hosting him again, whereby he will be able to break down those concepts even further. And I've offered my services to him so that we can share in terms of the developing of this particular concept in terms of collaboration, Kings and Queens. Pan-African collaboration is most definitely taking place. For the rest of the show, what we're going to do is break down some of the Pan-African achievements of our history. Some of them are so I said our history. What I mean is our history and our present. Some of the achievements in terms of the details of them are very, very underappreciated and undervalued. We call up the names of greats and we might mention a movement, but we don't do enough study as to what they did, and even more importantly, in regards to practical application, how they did what they did. So we spoke about earlier, we touched on the Papagavi movement in terms of the UNIA ACL. Brother Leader Bandaka has a presentation whereby he goes into significant detail about the achievements of the great liberation movements during the independence era, looking at the social indicators of economics, education, health, housing, food, and these kinds of things. What the best of our leaders achieved. Enough of the times we talk about the corrupt puppet regimes or neo-colonialist regimes on the continent, not enough focus is placed on the revolutionary leaders, the good leaders that we had, and what they did, what they achieved. But many of those, because we understand that we understand that currently the African world exists under the system of neo-colonialism, and that was really the system that was ushered in once Britain, America, and its multinational corporations and organizations such as the UN, the World Bank, and the IMF plotted to get rid of the revolutionary leaders by way of coups, by way of assassinations and other means, Kings and Queens. This is the system that they instituted, was neo-colonialism. And Kwame Nkrumah, the Osajefo, has a book which is entitled Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of imperialism, and he provides a definition for what neo-colonialism is. And we're going to give this definition because it's the most important one for understanding the current condition of African people, and then we'll move on and I'll explain in a little while. The definition reads as such: the essence of neo-colonialism is that the state which is subject to it, in theory, is independent and has all the outward trappings of an international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside. And that last part is important in the sense of the fact that Baba Osajefo, Kwame Nkrumah, says that it's the emphasis is on the economic system. So now, whereas the Western governments, the colonial regimes, were running your political office, now they don't necessarily run your political office, but they run your economic system. And through running your economic system, they run and govern your political policy. Every puppet, every neo-colonialist government and leader or quote-unquote dictator in Africa was either installed by the former colonizers and present neo-colonizers, or are being backed by them, kings and queens. Let's just remember that. And I say that to build to where we talk about achievements, because when I start on achievements, in terms of historically, one leader who we probably don't call and hail enough, who came up after much of the revolutionary governments and leaders were already taken out, and when the project of neocolonialism was well underway, rose up in a West African nation called Burkina Faso. He goes by the name of Thomas Sankara, and in the context of that destruction of a revolution and the installation of a most destructive system of government and economic policy, Thomas Sankara was able to rise to, and ascend to the leadership of Burkina Faso, and even in the 1980s achieved great things. With the Pan-African philosophy, was able to turn the fortunes of Burkina Faso around from a nation that was being severely underdeveloped and was on the upward spiral, so to speak, within 4 years, after which he himself was assassinated. But let us deal with some of what Brother Leader Bandaka has focused on in terms of detailing the success of Thomas Sankara. He came to power in Burkina Faso in 1983 in a coup that overturned a neo-colonial government that had been installed. Yeah, he then changed the name of the nation from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, and this name in the language of the people means the place or land of upright people. He named the land a name that spoke to the characteristics that he was trying to engender in the people. I should say they, because Thomas Sankara was not just an individual man, he was part of a movement, yeah, at which he was at the helm. They talk about corrupt African governments, kings and queens, and leaders that thief the money of the people. Well, Thomas Sankara cut the wages, yeah, of the government ministers. Yeah, he sold all the government Mercedes-Benz, yeah, little German car, yeah. He sold all the Mercedes-Benz, and they were to use Renault 5, yeah. So the nation wasn't yet making its own cars, so he got a cheaper car for government ministers to roll around in. He banned government ministers from traveling in by first class, in airplanes at first class, yeah, first class travel. He banned that, yeah. The government included a large number of women, and Baba Thomas Sankara was very instrumental and, you know, paid particular attention to the empowerment of the women who were empowering themselves and making sure that he did not stand in the way of that, and facilitated that. He ended the act of female circumcision. He banned the expulsion of girls from school for being pregnant. There was a practice that if a girl was going to school and she became pregnant, they would exclude her. And he was saying, well, it's not right to exclude the girl while the boy is still in school. This makes no sense. And so he banned that practice. And he also recruited women for active involvement in the army. If you know anything about African history, you know about the many warrior queens that we have produced and developed, kings and queens. And this is Thomas Sankara in the 1980s, not that long ago. Yeah, and he was able to achieve all of these things. Yeah. He encouraged, now he's gone to war with colonial, European, Eurocentric gender dynamics, kings and queens. He said he encouraged husbands to go to the market and cook for their wives, and I've seen footage of this where him and the husbands are in the market bartering for the price of produce that has come from the land, kings and queens. And he's taught the husbands now to understand, because if you understand in African tradition, many African traditions I should say, women run the market. And so the economy, therefore, is often governed by women and womanhood. Yeah. And so he's encouraging the men now to be involved in this, what might be considered domestic activity, which really speaks to, in a traditional sense, the economic well-being of the nation. He forbade the use of government chauffeurs, and now the government officials had to drive themselves. He redistributed land from feudal landlords to the peasant, the ordinary masses of the people, kings and queens. This is something that mirrors something that His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, a battle that he had to fight also in Ethiopia, but he was able to achieve this and therefore widen the market and the economic viability of the masses of the people. Under the government of Thomas Sankara, wheat production increased from 1,700 kilograms per acre to 3,800 kilograms per hectare. Sorry, let me repeat that. Wheat production increased from 17,000 kilograms per hectare to 38,000 kilograms per hectare, making the country food self-sufficient. You understand? There is not an African nation on the continent today or in the Caribbean today that is food self-sufficient. Not one. Yeah? The continent and the islands with the most food in the world can't feed themselves because of neo-colonial regimes that own the land and therefore the resources, including the food. So you have ridiculous scenarios like in Ghana, whereby Africans grow rice that is appropriated by Britain and America, and then the government is cajoled into a situation and box themselves into a situation whereby they're buying rice from Thailand and things like this, and America, and all manner of absurd realities that exist on the African continent. He opposed foreign aid. Yeah. Now imagine in this day and age where aid to Africa is a big market, a big racket that fuels corrupt European governments all around the world. Thomas Sankara refused the foreign aid, saying that he who feeds you controls you. Once again, kings and queens, he who feeds you controls you. Words of Thomas Sankara for why he refused aid from France in particular, and the IMF and the World Bank. Yeah, he spoke at the Organization of African Unity before it was upgraded, quote unquote, to the AU, the African Union, against what he described as neo-colonialist penetration of Africa through Western trade and finance. Understand, he saw Western trade as a neo-colonialist project. He called for an African United Front to repudiate foreign debt, argued that the poor and exploited did not have an obligation to repay the money. Yeah. The Ouagadougou Sankara converted the army's provisioning store into a state-owned supermarket open to everyone. Once again, Sankara converted the army's provisioning store into a state-owned supermarket open to everyone. Made well-off civil servants pay 1 month's salary to public projects. Yeah, so he's, amassing the state capital in order to create more services for the people. He refused to use the air-conditioned office, his own office, on the grounds that such luxuries were not afforded to the masses of his people. He also reduced his own salary and limited his possessions to a car, 4 bikes, 3 guitars, a fridge, and a broken freezer. Interestingly enough, kings and queens, they speak to us about corrupt African governments, and this is an example of a man who was not corrupt in any way, shape or form, yet he was assassinated in 1987. Think about it. And these are the things that he was able to achieve. He boosted Burkina Faso's textile industry by requiring public servants to wear a traditional African wear woven by the people of Burkina Faso with cotton from Burkina Faso. And this is the big one, two big ones. He also was able to galvanize the people of Burkina Faso to plant 1 million trees on the land to reverse the effects of desertification, when the desert is growing, kings and queens. And he engaged school children in this endeavor. Imagine that. The people of Burkina Faso planted 1 million trees, to withstand the effects of the desert, to push back the desert. That is amazing. That's an achievement. Practical Pan-Africanism. And he was also able to mobilize the people of Burkina Faso to lay train lines after he refused the IMF loan, the IMF and the World Bank loan, which was designed to help Burkina Faso, quote unquote, help Burkina Faso build its own train lines. And he got the people to lay it themselves, and he was on the road with the people laying it themselves. These are achievements of Pan-Africanism, kings and queens, Pan-Africanism in practice that we don't hear about. And as we move towards the close of our show, I want to give 2 examples of Pan-Africanism in practice in the UK African community right about now, by way of organization, not just mobilization as was dealt with earlier, kings and queens, by Baba Kwame Ture, but mobilization. And the first is the Interim National African People's Parliament, just sending a shout out for the upcoming General People's Assembly on Saturday the 25th of June 2016. The theme being Ain't No Stopping Us Now. Be part of the INAP Manifesto and Plan of Action, kings and queens. For those who may not be aware, this General People's Assembly will address 3 main areas. One is building the credit union. We are establishing a credit union as an economic power base through which to develop our community, kings and queens. Come down to the General People's Assembly to hear more about that. As a part of that program, we are trying to sign up 1,000 African people by March the 2nd, 2017, to form not just an economic power base, but a people power base, kings and queens. And so there is unification and synergy between those 2 aims. And also we will be developing the INAP Manifesto, which is the plan of action. We have at the moment 22 policy areas with which we are focusing on and developing a program for the development of our people. Once again, kings and queens, that is the General People's Assembly of the Interim National African People's Parliament, Saturday the 25th of June 2016 at the Queen Mother More School, Clapham Methodist Church Hall, Nelson's Row, London SW4 7JR. The time is 4:30 to 9:30 p.m. kings and queens. More information on that in future Africa Speaks with Al Kebalan shows. And I am sure, but once again, kings and queens, the International African People's Parliament is on the move. And as we move forward, the other example is the Pan-African Investment Day. The Pan-African Investment Day, kings and queens, is a unique opportunity bringing black institutions together with you, community investors from all walks of black life. We have 3 different institutions in our community that we are bringing together with you, the people, kings and queens, for the purpose of developing mutually beneficial economic relationships. It's important that we, one, highlight the work of these institutions in our community. Not enough people know that they exist, so we're solving that problem right there. And two, creating an environment whereby people can contribute towards their development. Our three institutions are the Marcus Garvey Nursery. Our brother Kende Andrews will be down from the Marcus Garvey Nursery, or of the Organization of Black Unity, to speak about the development of the Marcus Garvey Nursery. The Organization of Black Unity have acquired a 3-story building to house the re-establishment of the Marcus Garvey Nursery, which first opened in the 1970s, kings and queens. And so they are currently in the process of refurbishing that 3-story building and making it fit for purpose for African children. This is an independent African educational institution being initiated by the Organization of Black Leadership. And so brother Kende Andrews will be down to speak about that. They have an investment program. You can buy shares in the nursery. And so he will be presenting that program to the people, and the people will be able to invest in that program. Our second institution is Mother Earth Mineral and Mining Services, also known as MEMAMS. These are a group of Rastafari sisters who are currently working with small-scale miners in Zimbabwe, specifically mining gold, but they have plans to expand into Ethiopia and mine other precious metals and minerals, kings and queens. This is important. We spoke earlier about the state of neocolonialism and how they run our governments. They are able to run our governments through the manipulation of our resources, and so Africans need to be about the business of taking control and command of our resources globally and internationally, kings and queens. So this links up the diaspora with the continent, and also ensures that we are taking control of our minerals and our resources, kings and queens. Yeah, so that's Mother Earth Mining and Mineral Services, Pan-Afrikanism in practice. And they also have an investment program whereby you can buy shares in MEMAMS. Yeah, buy shares in MEMAMS and ensure that those shares will be reinvested in the development of other Pan-African projects in the African world, kings and queens. Okay, so there is also our third institution, the African Food Hall, which is going to be represented by brother Sunjata Keita. The African Food Hall is a program initiated by an organization called the African Family Works. Remember, Baba Buntu was speaking about the need for us to develop African families. Well, the African Family Works does brilliant work with African families, and as a part of that, they're developing with the African Food Hall, which will be a chain of supermarkets providing affordable foods while promoting a healthy lifestyle among the African community and African families, kings and queens. They are in the process of sourcing food, stuffs, products from African Caribbean countries, as well as African manufacturers around the world and locally, kings and queens, yeah, to stock this supermarket. And so they also have an investment program, kings and queens, and you will be able to come down to PAID, the Pan-African Investment Day, and invest in the African Food Hall. The Pan-African Investment Day takes place on Sunday, the 25th of July, kings and queens. You have enough time to plan and prepare for that. That is Sunday, the 25th of July, at the Caribou Center. The Caribou Center, which is in Brixton, kings and queens. 7 Gresham Road, Brixton, London, SW9 7PH. It starts at 1 p.m. and admission is only £1. For those who would like further information, you can check out the Al-Kebulan Revivalist Movement website, which is alkebulan.org. ALKEBULAN. Once again, alkebulan.org/paid. This is an initiative of the Al-Kebulan Revivalist Movement Youth, also known as the Army, and our primary partner for that day, kings and queens, is Gotkush TV. Once again, Pan-Afrikanism in practice, kings and queens. Gotkush TV is a media platform designed to develop and project positive imagery of African people and African power through the media. As we know, we live in the information age, and so mastering the media is going to be our primary means of disseminating information to our people and conscientizing our people. At the moment, Got Kush TV has 2 flagship programs that they have initiated. The first one is UK Fire, which is a program designed for revolutionary artistry, and secondly, the Black Group Economics Show, Kings and Queens, where they will be teaching Black group economics lessons and profiling Black group economics works in our community. So these are 3 examples of practical Pan-Africanism in progress. YouTube Got Kush TV, yeah, and soon Got Kush TV has its own website, which is in development, but for now you can get Got Kush TV through the YouTube. Just type that in and you'll see the fantastic work that is being done by our sisters and brothers of Got Kush TV, of which the Army Al-Kebalan Revivalist Movement is a part. This has been Africa Speaks with Al-Kebalan Kings and Queens, special ALD pre-recorded show, as we are currently in Birmingham with our sisters and brothers of the Pan-African Congress movement and the African community in general for African Liberation Day. We do hope you have enjoyed this show and taken something from it. And we do hope that this inspires us and our people, our organizations in particular, to be more collaborative in our efforts and work towards a more practical application within what we call Pan-Africanism. Tune in next week from Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. as we continue to talk it straight and make it plain. Round here we say, Tendai Mwani.
My brother also talks about our romanticizing of Mama Africa. I don't romanticize Mama Africa. I'm not into romance, I'm into Africa. And I am indeed more Afromantic about Mama Africa. More excited about Mama Africa. If you can be excited about Mecca and Hajj, then I can be excited about Mama Africa. On the face of the earth, which belongs to us, right? If you accept that Africa is the womb of humanity, then you accept that Africa, by implication, is our mother, right? That's right. We came out of the womb of Africa. Africa is our mother, that's right. Your mother may be perfect, may be imperfect, but she is still your mother. Africa is my mother, and her state present day is most imperfect, but she is still my mother. There was a woman, an African woman, who was in university. She was adopted, and she went to university. And brothers and sisters, one day, another woman came to her and said, your mother is in the canteen and she wants to speak to you. And she got up and ran out. She was raised by white people. She got up and ran out to see her mother. When she looked, she saw a black woman, an African woman, with her face badly distorted because her face was burnt. This is good. The woman looked at her mother and she said to the person that called her, oh, that's not my mother. My mother is not that ugly. She went back to where she was, and the sister went with her. She said, I am not now what I looked like when I had you. If you want to know what I look like, look in the mirror. I look exactly like you. Then she said, I got this way, my child, because I tried to save you from a fire. You were in a house that was burning down, and I sacrificed my beauty to save your life. Right. And she said, the only thing that pains me now is that you have become so mean and so wretched in your spirit. Mama Africa may not be looking too beautiful now, brothers and sisters, but she is still our mama.